All right, good morning, everyone. So we are right on the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hayley McGill, and today's webinar, Applying Data Governance 2.0, Best Practices to Business Intelligence Governance, is brought to you by the International Institute for Analytics, otherwise known as IIA, alongside Metric Insights. So just to give you a little bit of background on IIA, we are the industry's leading source of expertise for companies making the transition to data-driven decision-making and advanced analytics. So we offer 4 unbiased client-oriented services, which are designed to help organizations across the entire analytics lifecycle, from ideation through strategy and planning to operationalization. So these 4 services are the Research and Advisory Network, the Analytics Leadership Consortium, Analytics Maturity Assessments, as well as our advisory services. So if you did want to learn a little bit more about any of these, you can do so at iianalytics.com/services. Sorry guys, I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied this morning. So before we get started, I will just cover a few housekeeping items. So we will be accepting questions throughout the presentation, which you can submit in the chat window. And Drew, who you can see over there in the corner, will be monitoring that. So we will revisit them at the end of the presentation if time allows. We are also recording this, so if you do have to step away at any point, that's okay. We will have the recorded version in your inbox tomorrow, which you can watch on demand and share with your team. So with all of that said, I would like to welcome our speakers, Marius Moscovici and Drew Smith. So Marius is the founder and CEO of Metric Insights and has over 20 years experience in analytics and data warehousing, and was previously the co-founder and CEO of Integral Results, a leading BI consulting company. And he also formed and led the data warehousing and real-time analytics group at Linden Lab. And then we also have Drew Smith, who is the Vice President of the Analytics Leadership Consortium here at IIA. And he has over 20 years of global experience working on both the business side of analytics, leveraging insights for business performance, and on the delivery side of analytics, driving the use of enterprise analytics. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand over to Drew, who hopefully is a lot better at speaking this morning than I am.
Thanks, Haley. That remains to be seen. We've got about 58 minutes to see if I pull that one off. But we've also made it easy for ourselves because Marius and I will just refer to BI governance. So business intelligence governance is a mouthful, Haley. So no shame in stumbling on that one. But welcome, everybody. Really great to have you. Really great to be with you again, Marius. Always fun to talk about this topic, which we call BI governance. And we're going to start off with an image maybe you didn't expect to see in a BI governance photo. And you're welcome, if you have rapid fire fingers, to chat at me who you think this is. There's definitely some rock fans, I think, who would know who this is. It's a drummer of a band, and their most famous song has a line that says, "If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice." And what Marius and I were talking about, there you go, Jeff Shackett in with the win. So what we have decided is we think that people are not governing their BI. And that's a choice. So they are effectively still governing their BI. They just aren't governing their BI. They are not doing anything active in the way that they govern their BI. Their BI is just happening. Maybe every once in a while they're doing some audits. Maybe they've assigned role profiles to see who can get access to what reports. But that is very, very small governance. And another way we say this, and we say this in the paper, which will accompany this webinar as well, is if you don't govern your BI at all or very little, you eventually will die. You will have substandard reports. You will have bad decisions. You could have leaked reporting, which would enable some stuff to collapse as well. And if you over govern your BI, if you go the opposite direction, you lock everything down, you will also die. It's just you will die more slowly, because essentially the desire of your company to use data and business intelligence will wither and wither and wither, and eventually the competitor will come in and they will actually take your business away. So active BI governance is what we're advocating for here. We're also trying to make it really simple, really straightforward, and actually we have a framework which we can hand over to you, as I mentioned, in the paper as well as in this webinar, and both of which will be sent to participants at the end. So really good for those who guessed. Neil Peart, the band is Rush. As I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of theirs, but I do always like that line. So with that said, we'll get started a little bit more with the less rock-oriented part of the show. And today what we're going to cover is actually three topics. It's actually going to be a bit of a big fat bell curve. Always land a math joke in with business intelligence and data folks. We're going to cover a really short part about some key lessons from what we call data governance 1.0. Myself and someone far smarter than I, a guy named Peter Kapoor, wrote 2 papers on data governance, the first of which is about the failures of data governance. I'm just going to share with you what those are because I think there's a lot to learn and to be applied when you launch BI governance. And then we're going to do 5 principles of BI governance. So Marius and I will kind of trade back and forth here. So you'll eventually get to hear someone besides myself. And then we're going to share briefly a framework, which, as I mentioned, we'll walk through quickly, but is available in more depth, again, in a paper, which we will link to on the Metric Insights website. And we'll send out that link when we send out this presentation. So Marius, anything to share with us before I get started into the key lessons from Data Governance 1.0?
And thanks, Drew. I think the only thing I would add to what you said there is that we are asked a lot of times to do kind of audits for our customers to help them with determining what's been happening from a BI governance perspective. And when we looked at their BI tools, we find almost universally less than half of the licenses that they have for BI technologies, doesn't matter what it is, Tableau, MicroStrategy, Click, whatever they have, are actually being utilized. So that's a very common situation where, and additionally, if you look at the content, where you say, okay, what out of the content that you have out there, all those dashboards and reports, if you ask the question, well, what percentage of all of that content is actually getting any usage at all? Even if you look over like maybe a 6-month period, it's typical that number is also well south of 50%. In fact, we did that for a customer recently with thousands of users, thousands of pieces of content. It was less than 10% of the content that they had in their BI environment was getting any kind of engagement at all. So that's sort of endemic of this sort of crisis out there, where really people are just not governing their content, and over time it just creates this big mess that is turns their environment into a jungle and is a form of death, as you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's the third form of death, when your CFO comes and says, wait, 50% of these licenses aren't used. I know how much each one of those 50% of the licenses cost. So now you have a different type of death, and it's your own personal death, or at least the death of your career, maybe. But yeah, so if you don't want to go with Canadian rock philosophy, you can take the math approach, which says if you are spending the kind of money you're spending for a license for those tools, which are very good, no judgment at all, then they aren't being used, then that is something you need to take corporate responsibility for and find a better place for that money. And it could be through more effective BI, and that's a great start to BI governance. So you can also add to the fact that it's easy to start, and you should start, the fact that you'll get some fairly quick economic returns if you invest just a little bit in data governance.
And Drew, I think you put your finger on it. It's not that there's somebody doing something wrong here. It's not in a sense of like the analysts. You can have very capable analysts. All these organizations that we've been working with have great analysts. It's just that the absence of this BI governance framework and the ability to do that just creates an environment where it's impossible for the content that they're creating to really get the light of day and to get the kind of active engagement. And it also makes it impossible for the consumers of this content to stay continuously engaged with that content.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not from negative intent. It's just from, the world moving pretty darn quick. So let's talk about actually some of the key lessons from Data Governance 1.0. And as I say, I was involved in data governance early, and maybe you were as well, Marius, given your long career, but there's some lessons I want to share. And first I want to share is that failure can be a really, really good thing. You can learn a lot from failure, right? So the image on the right is the Apple Newton. I don't know if anyone actually on the call ever bought an Apple Newton, but you've certainly bought the lineage products to the Apple Newton, right? It's not hard to imagine that without the Apple Newton, there may well never have been an iPod or an iPhone, and certainly there wouldn't be one of the world's wealthiest companies that we know today. So failure is a good thing. It can be highly instructive. And one of the things that we say sometimes at the ALC is you don't have to endeavor on the failure yourself. You can learn from the failures of others. And here what we're trying to do is learn from the failures of a practice within the analytics space, within the data space, and that is about data governance. So The first of which is data governance at first became a very command and control thing. Data governance itself was a thing, and people enamored themselves with their ability to govern data, when in reality, governance, whether BI or data governance, is a means to a business end. Governance is just a way to enable you to make better decisions, to make better choices, and to do better business. It is not a thing in of itself. It is nothing except in the service of other things in your business. And that's the need statement. And unfortunately, something that took a while for many people in data governance to learn along the way. The other thing is that data governance has evolved a lot, and BI governance should just take this on straight from the beginning, that why governed matters as much as what governed. And if you'll forgive the caveman speak of that, what I mean by that is letting people know what you're trying to achieve, why you are governing this thing in this way, giving them the reason behind, has several big benefits that you should tap into really quickly. The first of which is actually you have a chance to engage a user with an active discussion about what data matters to make what business decision, and that's immensely valuable. The second thing is, as a data or an analytics or a BI professional, you learn a lot more about the business and what people need to do their job well. So that's another reason to engage. So start a lot with the why you're doing this in order to get the conversation going, in order to involve the right people. We'll talk about that framework to involve the right people later, but do that early on and make it a key part of it. So the why over the what. And again, one of the things with data governance that happened, especially early 1.0, was people would go into a horrible conference room and they would create a 155 slide deck. And then there would be all these principles out, and it would be a bound book that would sit in a desk about who can do what, when, and how. And that's a terrible idea. Don't do it. Instead, start with what you're trying to achieve. So Marius mentioned earlier, you may well have people who are not using the content that they could use. You may have people who have licenses that really should be assigned to other people. If you started with a lightweight governance routine to evaluate that would be fantastic. You don't need to make that a big formal thing. You can make that a relatively lightweight approach. Just get started, build as you go, adapt as you go. The people involved are growing and developing in their skills and capability in data. The technology is growing and the requirements are growing. So you need to be flexible. And then the final lesson, I think data governance 1.0 has evolved to, and we make a big argument for this in data governance 2.0, is bias to over-inclusion. Have more people involved in the business, have more people up and down the hierarchy involved, have more people in different functions, have more people who have almost never touched a piece of BI in their life involved. And the reason you do that is because BI is actually the key driver of self-serve analytics today. So more people involved will help you make better decisions. Now you have to manage that, of course, in a way, but we have some ideas and tricks and tips on that. But bias towards over-inclusion, instead of saying, oh, we shouldn't ask that person because they don't know everything, or we should only ask this person because they know everything. Those binary worlds don't exist in BI governance today. So these are some of the lessons that we would like you to take in so that you can turn from your Newton failure of 1.0 to your iPhone 13 in your BI governance. And so what we're going to do is now focus on these 5 elements, these 5 principles of BI governance. I'm going to cover a couple. Marius is going to help me kind of see them a little bit more concretely because they are conceptual. And we're going to work through these. All good to go for on this one, Marius? Or do you have any, does data governance 1.0 give you flashbacks that you care not to share?
No, I think.
All right, we get going.
You put your finger right on it. I think, yeah, let's go for it.
Cool, no worries. So it always seems I'm saying that Mills White BI users are better. It is extremely important to make these explicit statements explicit. Another way to say this is badly governed BI is just bad decisions you have yet to realize are bad decisions. So you really need to make sure that you're informed business decisions. You need to focus on the right and relevant content at the right time. You need transparent users, and you need to bring those who are governed in, and you need robust and flexible approaches. So let me go a little bit deeper on each one of those. And as I say, give Marius a chance to chime in with some thoughts. So as I mentioned with the first one, you can tell it's a little bit out of my sync, but as I mentioned with the first one, this is really important to be explicit about. We encourage you to be explicit about this. We talk a little bit about this in the paper at some depth about the type of decisions that get made and how important it is to have those informed decisions. Because you really need to know that the people who are accessing the BI are accessing the right BI, not for a governance point of view. Again, you're not trying to stop people, you're trying to enable people. And that's a big mindset. You're trying to say, I want the person who has to make a quick decision to be able to make it with the right things very quickly. So the more they know about the BI and the governance that is directing them fluidly into where they need to go, the better off they're going to be. They're going to be more confident and more comfortable making a decision. And confidence and comfort in making decision will lead to speed and will lead to alignment in larger groups making the decision. This is really fundamentally understood in decision making across the corporate and organizational world, and it fits perfectly into BI as well. And related to that is you do need to make sure that people are getting the right content to the right person at the right time with the right info behind in the right format. And this is sort of a spectrum, actually. It's not so difficult to make sure that it's the right person. Sometimes, you can do that as early as when you start somebody up in a new role. You can do that by role assignment, access. The right time, sometimes that's when you can get the data. Sometimes it's when people need to make the decision, but it should be more the second when they need to make the decision, and you work for the first. And the right info, obviously, we all know, those of us who've been in analytics and BI, the whole sales says it's 103.6 and marketing says it's 103.8, and everybody gets worked up about that. But the right format is also really important. And especially out there, those of you who have multiple BI tools, and Marius, I know you have clients, and we have clients that really do have maybe 2 or 3 of these big tools. And that's actually not a bad decision because those tools have different attributes, right? So some of them are better at visualization and some of them are better at other parts of the BI spectrum. So make sure the right person not only has the right info, but that they're seeing it in the right way and at the right time.
And Joe, I think just to jump in there for a moment, I think there's sort of some of what you've spoken to there. It underlies sort of a paradigm shift, if you like, right? A lot of times in BI, we're just thinking about, creating the next dashboard, creating the next visualization, answering a particular business problem. But we really need, in order to be good stewards of all these resources that we're creating for our end users and create an environment where they can consume that, we should be thinking more around the curation aspect of things and around creating more of like that museum experience, right? Where when you go to see a museum, you're seeing the artwork and you're seeing it in context. You're getting an interpretation of it. You're giving the audience all of the information they need to really understand what they're consuming. And that same kind of philosophy should be applied from a governance perspective to the consumption of BI analytics, so that then you do get the right person at the right time making the right decision with the data.
Yeah, exactly. It is something that is, again, like we've talked about, it's an active pursuit, right? You're actively building it on. And once again, the reason to build a lightweight framework is that will change. Your business will change. You will change divisions. You will, if you're a retailer, change your selling mix. It will increasingly be DTC and other channels over physical. So you need to have this as a mindset and always be adapting as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that experience as well, Marius. And then, of course, related to that, and interested to see some of the thoughts you have on this as well, Marius, is that you need to be transparent about why people can access what they can't access, right? You need to be sure that people can trust what they see behind. So you need to give a little bit of detail as much as is necessary. You don't need to actually show the algorithm in the code, in the Python code, but you do need to say why this decision was, why this visual representation is this one, why this data is this, when this data is pulled, how much this data might be reliable or unreliable. And one of the things I think that happens here is people kind of box themselves in. They either say, oh, I won't actually release anything until it's perfect. Well, good luck with that, because data is never really perfect. Or they might say, I will actually just caveat and legalese this thing like it's a pharmaceutical ad at the, in the middle of a sitcom. Like, this may be wrong, this may be wrong, this may be wrong. You really just need to get the right level of transparency. Again, going back to the first of the principles, are you informing the decision makers well enough that they know what they're looking at, that they trust it? If they're not sure about it, are they able to get to people who can help them? If they have questions or concerns, do they feel that those questions or concerns related to the BI will be addressed? This transparency, again, comes from one of the learnings with data governance 1.0, which was much more fiat. Well, what's the answer why can't you access that data table? Because we said so. Well, people aren't children, and parents even don't say that anymore as much as they used to. So transparency is absolutely essential in order to increase that trust and increase the use in BI. And I know, Marius, you have a couple of thoughts and ideas. Maybe should we take them with slides, or do you have them off the top?
Yeah. Let's take a look at the slides and we'll talk about it, because I think you hit on a few different points, and I want to kind of go drill down into some of those areas. So first of all, from a content with context perspective, if you think about that environment where you have all of those assets that are some of which maybe in your BI assets, a very large percentage of them are either obsolete or duplicative or things that are no longer relevant. You don't want to create an experience for your users where some new person in the business is opening up their BI tool for the first time and they're stumbling across assets where 9 out of 10 of them, or even 5 out of 10 of them, are not going to create value for them. You want to create an experience that is like that museum experience where everything that they're going to be looking at has actually been vetted, and it's the right content for them, and it's going to generate value for them, because that's what's going to have them come back and continue to use analytics. So what you're seeing here is an example is, you need to create a portal, right? And so putting a portal experience together, curating and bringing in the assets that are relevant, irrespective of which BI tool those are from, whether those things are SharePoint assets or things in shared drives or Click or Tableau or MicroStrategy or whatever you're using for your BI infrastructure, bringing it all together, and then creating a catalog where there's a level of metadata overlaid onto it that enables users to understand the information context is absolutely essential. So kind of, if you see here, kind of in this example, if I click on one of those tiles that has a visualization that I'm looking at in the portal, I get a higher fidelity view where now I've got this context to the right that shows me, what are the enterprise KPIs that are associated with this. So if I'm looking at, this is measuring sales, or it's measuring cost of goods, or what churn, or whatever it is measuring, knowing that, and then being able to know ownership. Who do I ask questions for? Right? Any kind of expert commentary, the equivalent of that little placard you see underneath the museum art piece that explains how you should interpret this piece of art. All data classification information. Does it contain PII data? All of the context that I need as a consumer of this content to know should I dive further and do analysis with this? And if I do, how should I treat this data? Oh, it contains PII data. I'm going to be really careful with it. Or hey, this is non-confidential data, so I know I can use it differently. So all of that context is what allows me to provide, as you said, sort of the level of transparency to me as a user and the level of information that will allow me to take correct action with this. And that's when we talk about governance. As you said, Drew, it's not just about restriction of access. It's such a small part of that. The bigger part is creating this environment where as a consumer of these assets, I have everything that I need at my disposal to really make proper use of this information. And then
I think this is a great opportunity maybe to bring in a question from the audience. Marita chatted at us, and maybe we cover it later as well, Marius, but I'll read it out. Any tips on how to shift a distressingly reluctant BI audience from a push reports via email to a pull, access verified curated information via the data analytics portal, or do we need both? And first off, I love the word distressingly reluctant. I don't know who's distressed about it. I don't think it's the audience, but I think it's probably you, Marita. But we have a couple of thoughts in the framework here, but any thoughts that you think maybe speak to this screen? I mean, I think there is something to be said for when you build it right, then you actually will have more people get excited by it. And I think one of the ways to get off of email and into something where they pull is not necessarily by the BI team, no offense, or the data team, no offense. It's more where the peers say, hey, have you seen this? I looked at, or when the peers make a decision and say, oh, I made this decision, and someone says, that was a really good decision, really deep thinking. Yeah, but it wasn't really deep thinking. It was just, the BI team and I work together to make sure that I understand what's going on. I think there is the peer-led thing is the best way to get people off the email. I do think, unfortunately, I'm a corporate realist. Sometimes it is both. I mean, I'm not quite sure many BI professionals are willing to yell at the CEO and say, no, I'm not going to have you get an automated email. I think that's a bad idea. You'd love to move them off that, but maybe you can't. Any thoughts on this one, or should we maybe dig a little deeper?
No, I think I'll add a few points to what you said. I think first of all, getting via email could be good or not. It depends on what's happening. Is it going into somebody's the equivalent of their spam folder? You know, something, you know, where it's just sort of going in and nobody's looking at it, or is it content that people are actually consuming? You know, are you delivering what they need via that analytic just in that email, where they can actually go and do their job with it? And the way to find out about that is really to survey your users and really get deep down and understand, you know, how much, to what extent are these analytics being consumed. But then I think you do need both. You want that, ideally what you have is that distribution kind of, it generates that oh, I need to look at this, you know, and you need to be very careful about that distribution. Make sure it's targeted, make sure it's provided with context, that it's not just, you know, here's 30 different dashboards of which you only really care about one, but that it's personalized so that you know, you're taking advantage of that time. And then you want to drive them from that into an experience within the portal and the BI tool that they're using that is guided. So again, thinking about the museum rather than the overgrown jungle, right? It should be an experience, and we do this with customers all the time. You create these sort of what we call portal page experiences, or kind of, you can think of them as customized journeys, where the various analytics that they use should be combined together into an experience where they're stepped through it, and they are able to accomplish the job that they're going to accomplish with their visualization. And so it's all about really being thoughtful about how that information is organized, how it's put together, and how that user journey is supported in whatever portal you have, to make sure that the users have an effective and productive experience, and they get the value quickly.
Yeah, and Marius, coming from Nigel, it's, you know, the pendulum is kind of swings both ways. So Nigel's actually pointed out that there could be an over-enthusiastic business user who goes and grabs uncurated data and makes decisions without consideration of where that data was sourced. But here, I think, as a business guy, I'm not always the first to point to technology, but here I think some technology can help you a lot. And I'm curious if this is the right slide, or maybe is it even your next slide that we maybe want to address Nigel's question about making sure over-enthusiastic people are making decisions with enough speed, but not haste, right? If we think about it like that.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a slide on, but like there's a little lineage icon there. And one of the things that we find that addresses this is, if you can expose the lineage with the content, then that, you know, it's all about educating your users. So it's about, you know, it's great that they're enthusiastic. You want to give them the tool when they look at a particular visualization to understand the classification of that data, but also the source of that data. You know, where is this coming from? You know, Tableau, for example, in this example, has all that lineage information, but you want to be able to bring that up directly when users consuming that. And that's the key, is give them all the context they need so that they're smart about how to use the information, and they're not using it correctly. And then tying it to those enterprise KPIs is the other key piece, right? As a business user, if I've got a cross-reference, if I know when I'm looking at this visualization, this has the sanctioned definition of sales, then implicit in that is that I can use this data for any sales-based decisions because it's coming from the right place. And if I should be able to see what that definition is, should be able to see some sourcing information around that, around lineage, and I should be able to know who I can ask questions of if there's any clarification. And those together provide the right level of context for me to make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add to that, sort of from a management and leadership point of view, you can also sort of, if they're not able to really understand well enough what the data curation looks like, or how well it's sourced, you can also go, super interested that you're looking for that data, love it. What's the business query you're trying to understand? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And especially with this screen here, we're thinking about that problem, and that question may well have already been answered. It may have been asked 6 months ago and someone forgot about it. And this goes back to your other 50%, right? The underutilized report. So also good to take that opportunity when someone's going and hunting and pecking for a ton of data to sort of say, great, love your energy, love your enthusiasm. Could we focus a little bit on the question, and then we'll talk later about the data? And you may never talk about the data because the question might be answered through analytics or BI more than raw data.
That's a great point.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to jump another slide, but we definitely have some chat, and we'll try to pull that in as we go as well.
Okay, so this slide is just really an illustration of the point that you made earlier, Drew, which is that trust, I can't speak, trust is incredibly important, right? And the reality is that, establishing trust is all about creating transparency, which isn't about being perfect all the time, because no matter how good your data pipelining technology is, there's going to be some day where there's a problem with the data, or some day where it happens to be behind because some downstream process hasn't gotten the data to you in time. And so it's all about making sure that the user experience is such that they know when that has happened proactively, right? So what you don't want is the BI professional learning from the executive that there's a problem with the data, right? After the executive has spent time looking through it, been frustrated because they think something's gone wrong with the business, and it turns out that no, actually, we just had a problem with the data today, or you're actually looking at last week's data, you're not looking at this week's data. So, what you want to do is you want to have governance in place that not only captures these downstream issues, and my load is late, or there's some kind of data quality issue on the left-hand side, you're seeing there an example of a number of rows in a table, or the total number of sales or something like that, and you're seeing some big drop, something that there's an anomaly, but not only capture that anomaly in downstream processing, but make sure that you have an announcement at the very top when people are consuming these dashboards that tells you, hey, something's going on today. There's a problem with the data, heads up, we're investigating it. Or, the data's delayed today, it's going to come, it'll be updated by 2 p.m. So those things either happening because an analyst has gotten that alert and they're going in there and putting that notification for users, or in some cases making that happen automatically just because we detected there's a problem. And so having that transparency and communicating that proactively is just, that's the way from a technology perspective, from an enablement perspective, to make sure that governance acts as a force that creates a high level of transparency and trust within the organization.
Yeah, and Marius, this is essentially basically, in one way or another, saying you're certifying that the data is where it is in whatever shape it's in, and ideally it's in good enough shape to act on. We have a question from one of the audience members. Do you also see the opportunity in your experience with clients to sort of certify the publisher, certify the producer of the reports, or maybe even certify the consumer in a way? This is where I'll share with you this like sort of internal dilemma that makes me switch back and forth, because there's definitely right ways to interpret data and there are wrong ways to interpret data. And there does require skill sets to learn the right way. At the same time, there are many smart people out there in your business making good decisions on data. And they don't all have the title of data scientist or what have you. So how do you sort of secure that the report being shown, these bubbles, that's the right way to look at this, or these bubbles, those are the right format, or the data behind? So certifying the producers as well as the data. Do you guys see opportunity for that? Because I can see a big opportunity in balancing the centrally driven, I knight you, queen of reporting on sales. And I can also see the crowdsourced power of sort of, oh my goodness, Zoe is just the queen of actually sales visualizations. Everyone uses them. We've made great decisions on them. How do you balance that certification and that crowdsourcing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to talk about that maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Later, but I think there's roles for both, and it's a kind of a combination of that bottoms up and tops down approach, where you want to have, in some cases, official certification of data stewards, people do that. In other cases, you're going to be leveraging the reputation. The fact that feedback that you've gotten on collecting feedback on these kinds of visualizations, very important, using that to factor into search and analysis, so that those things that have high perceived value within the organization are easier for people to discover, show up when people are looking for things, and then get a higher level of engagement, right? So I think both of those should be working together in a good governance strategy. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a couple other questions related to that. We can also take a crack at those when we show that framework that I mentioned, because what we are touching on is there are experts in this system, people who have genuinely high levels of education in quantitative disciplines. And there are people who have educations in visualization, and there are people who are raised in this business and make the right decision and really are obsessed about the customer, obsessed about operational efficiency or whatever. And it's all these people working together that we advocate for a good BI governance model, and we'll cover a little bit that later. But I just want to make sure that if we have some questions relevant to the screen as best as I can get, we get there. So one of the ones that comes out is, do you get observability inside the data quality communication, or is that maybe a couple levels deep into the data infrastructure, such that maybe it's very rarely needed to communicate to those using BI, that the concept of data observability?
I mean, I think I'm not sure what exactly we mean by that. Like, as far as I think that there's, if there's an observable defect in the data, right, and if it's observable downstream, it should be rippled down into all the visualizations that consume it. And then additionally, the same idea of any kind of a lot of times people spend a lot of time on data governance, and they'll do glossary definitions, they'll map terms to data, they'll do all that. If that data if that metadata, if that context is not then observable all the way downstream in the visualization, you really are not getting return on investment on that. Great, right, that the data scientist knows and has noted that, and is sharing with other data scientists that this is the definition of sales, and this, here's what this business term means here. But what you really want is be able to bubble that up all the way to the consumer of the information, so that in a way that they can consume it, so that they benefit from that as well. So I think to me, that's how observability of data is very important across the board.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a couple of steps back in the data pipeline, but it done well, it can feed this thing that we talked about with transparency and quality and communication. So if we move on just really quickly, we are going to get into that framework. As I mentioned, we've got a couple more things and a couple more thoughts to gather between Marius and I. But one of the things that data governance 1.0 failed and data governance 2.0 is embracing is the notion that those who are impacted actually should have a more trusted and valued voice in BI governance. And then again, that'll come back in the framework, but again, it's a principle. So principally speaking, you cannot, with BI, by definition being the driver of sort of self-serve, widespread democratization of analytics, you can't say that and then have only the decisions made by a central few. It is basically logically inconsistent. And it's also just a bad idea, because eventually, if you don't include these voices, well, they will basically just stop using what you send them. They will stop accessing the tool because they'll feel disengaged. So you want to involve people both because they have smart things to say about the things in your BI world, which is BI governance, and because you want to keep them continually engaged and continually developing as you go along your road of BI governance. So it's very important that, and we'll look at this with the framework, that you give enough weight. And if you have some sort of committee structure and you have 10 people in that committee, more than 5 should be actually within the users. And when you look at old data governance, it used to be 8 people out of 10 would be data geeks like me, and then as a favor to the business, they would give 2 to people, but they were often like finance and audit, so they weren't even that far afield. So in BI governance, bring BI decision makers into governance and give them a trusted voice. And then ultimately, one of the things we know for sure is that this landscape will change. We know that more and more people will become more and more interested in data. We know that people joining your organization today from university or MBA programs are more data savvy by a lot than your average person in the organization who's maybe been there for 10 or 15 years, at least in large organizations. So the appetite for data and data governance and BI governance, and the appetite and the technology driving those is going to change. It's just going to change. It changes every day. And, Marius, you guys know that better than most. So you need to anticipate that what's going to change in your organization and outside your organization means you need something you can actually make a little bit flexible and a little bit scalable. And that's super important. That's why we start with principles, because those are sort of modifiable with the term. How you act on them, you can change as the organization transforms.
I think that you really put your finger on it right there. And I think it's going back to that analogy you made at the beginning with the data governance 1.0, when people first started and created these quotas of, of like, here's how it's going to be done. And it was like the tablet coming up from Mount Sinai to people, right? And that just didn't work because one, it was authoritative and excessive. It was too rigid, and it didn't deal with this key reality, which is one size does not fit all. And so you must have a process that is provides the right level of structure, but is not too heavyweight, and yet it is appropriate for the resource that is being governed. And what do we mean by that? Well, so clearly the amount of governance that you want to apply over a visualization that your executives are using and sharing with your board of directors around the financial results, like that is probably a much higher level of governance, a much higher level of structure than what you're going to do for something that one person uses to look at expense reports and whether the expense report payments are happening on time, right? Both of those are important functions, but you don't necessarily have the same stakeholders in each process. The people generating those visualizations are different, people consuming them are different. So you need a process by which you manage each of those visualizations that's fundamentally different and yet still fits into an overarching paradigm or concept of BI governance. That is, there should be BI governance in both cases, right? And what you're seeing here should be a very familiar sight to people that are used to maybe software development, like a Kanban type board, right? But instead of having little bits of code or JIRAs or things of that nature that are moving, this is visualizations, right? And the idea here is that maybe initially there's a bunch of content that comes in that's pending review. As new visualizations are created, they automatically get bubbled up into that. And then users simply, you can move them between the different stages. And at each stage in this governance process, as this piece of content moves from being in a pending status all the way to being published and certified and consumable by their users, is being enriched by the right and verified by the right party. So you might have a developer reviewing it to say, okay, I want to make sure that this is using the right rules, and I'm signing off on this. A business user might, or key stakeholder in the business that knows that area, might be looking at it and saying, oh, this actually adheres to the business definitions that for this particular domain. So this is ready for certification. And then the data steward might be saying, well, yeah, this definition actually meets the corporately accepted definitions for what this particular P&L line item means, for example, right? So that they can be doing that data lineage analysis and making sure that they certify, they give it their stamp of approval, and then it gets published out there. So, this is an example of a more complex multi-stage process, lots of people collaborating on it. And then you could have another piece of content that goes maybe through a two-step process where they just simply developer is saying this is good and they're standing behind it, or perhaps the developer and the business user are partnering together and certifying it. So, but the key principle is you've got to have a process, because if you don't, then you're going to have that clutter where, instead of just the things that are worthwhile and visible and useful, you're really giving people all kinds of junk that was maybe useful 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, but it's become obsolete, or it's a duplicate of something that already exists. And then the second key point is the process is not a one and done operation, right? Generally speaking, content, when it is published, when it is certified, it should have an expiration date on it, right? It should have just like there's a sell by on things that go up on the grocery shelf, right? There should be an idea to say, well, okay, this visualization is great now, it's been certified, but if it's that financial report, well, maybe it needs to be recertified every quarter before the board meeting. Or if it's a sales reporting, maybe it needs to be recertified and revisited once a year, whenever we do a territory realignment. Or maybe all other visualizations should be reviewed by the content creators once every 18 months to make sure they're still relevant. You need to have those mechanisms in place that ensure that not only that things are correct when they get into the consumption pipeline, but that on an ongoing basis, all that content continues to be fresh and relevant and accurate, so that people can count on the right data being there when they're looking at the visualizations.
Yeah, no, Marius, I love this visual, and I love what you say about it. And it builds neatly, as you say, about the difference between maybe a table or a graph, which is going to appear in your 10K filing, and one which is just going to be a part of your daily huddle. It's a big difference, right? And as you say, some sales reports or dashboards or things that might wind up on your business intelligence tools, maybe many more tiles than this and many fewer. And that is exactly echoing what you say, which is that BI governance is highly contextual, right? So the people who can make that decision are also shown on the screen, because that decision, whether or not it is something which is, many more tiles than what's seen on the screen, or whether many fewer, is a joint venture between the business user. What are the depth of my needs? How secure do I need to be that this is, ironclad and perfect? And the data steward saying, yes, we have the data and we can verify that that data is correct. And the developer involved and say, yes, I can produce that in the time that you ask. So the great thing also about this is you use the technology to reinforce what we've said with the principles, right? This technology reinforces involvement of the user, involvement of many people, keeping the focus on the business decision that you're trying to make. And that's really important when you're trying to make a transformation, is that you have these principles, which are just words in a PowerPoint, but that comes alive in the way that you work, and the way that you work is reflected in the technology with which you work. And I think it's a really great visualization, and it's easy for me in my mind just to see like many more tiles or many fewer tiles, and see the speed be fast or the speed be appropriately a little slower.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you want the technology to enable the process you've established. That's the key principle. You're not leading with technology. You should be leading with the right process, the right governance, but then you need to make sure that you've got the process, that you've got technology to move things through that process in a way that is auditable and scalable.
Absolutely.
So then the other aspect of it is that, if you're going to have any kind of governance, you need to be able to measure compliance and performance, right? And again, governance is not just about restriction. In fact, it should be very small, bit of 10% restrictive and 90% enablement, right? But the two things you want to do is you want to be able to understand, to what extent are things being certified, who's certifying content, who's not, how long have things been around. And then you also want to look at the engagement side and see how well are you doing as a result of this governance to work, right? What's the ROI that you're getting out of it? So what you're seeing here in this visualization is two things. And on the right-hand side, you're seeing an analysis of content usage over the last 60 days, where you're saying, what's the content that's most popular, what's increasing in popularity, what's decreasing in popularity, what's unused. There's another kind of view of this kind of screen where you can also see what are the things that people are searching on, and what are they finding, what are they not finding. So getting a real insight into what is the user experience that is happening with the content that you publish. And then that slide out in the center, what that's showing you is kind of a time-lapsed view of engagement by users or by groups with a particular piece of content. So you can imagine those rings are like 1 day, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You want to be able to measure and see not just that, hey, there's been in the last 60 days, 100 people have used this, but you want to know, well, did people start using it and come back every day or every week? Or did I have a usage pattern when somebody comes in and then after a day, they stop using it? And all of this informs your knowledge to know, have I promoted the content correctly? Have I provided the right context around that content by way of lineage, by way of classification, by way of association with enterprise KPIs and things of that nature, such that I can promote a continuous and sustained engagement with that content, right? And this is what's telling you how well your BI governance processes are going. And to the extent that you're seeing content where that's going well, then you take those practices and you socialize them and you repeat them elsewhere. You promote them to other people in the organization so they know what's working best. Those things are not area where we're not working so well. You assist those folks to help them govern their content better. You bring the best practices from that are working and help educate them on that. So having that measurement tools in place is just an absolutely essential piece to having BI governance really exist and live and be a continuous improvement process within your organization.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm such a fan of this part of the tool and this part of the discussion. My risk would be, if I had this, is that I would look at it too often. So I think you also have to have some discipline, but I'll also connect it backwards in the presentation. I'm going to jump forward into the presentation because this is really a great pivot into the framework. Backwards is into the question that was asked earlier, which is, have you distressingly reluctant users? Well, you probably do, and you probably don't. There are definitely in every organization going to be some people who are not reluctant at all, and certainly not distressingly reluctant. And getting to know those people and saying, hey, what do you like about this? They will describe what they like about what they use in your BI ecosystem in a way that maybe you wouldn't say. And you can steal those words and bring them over to the people who are distressingly reluctant, or you can send those people over to people who are distressingly reluctant. But regardless, you're much more efficient with a tool like this. You're much more effective and precise with a tool like this because you're not speculating about who likes what. And you're not also, the big thing in BI that I remember is you're not only speaking to the loudest voice. So the person that would yell at you, I had somebody, I think I told you this earlier before in my BI adventure when I made some changes to the infrastructure, called me the dumbest person they had ever met. But luckily not everybody thought that, but he was loud about it. So I kind of had to address him, but I would much rather be working on facts about whether I was the dumbest person or not. And if you're doing reporting and a lot of this person's work is good, they're probably not the dumbest person in your organization. So as I mentioned, we are going to share this framework with you, and this is really quick on the framework. Well, really light on the framework. We won't go that quick, but as I mentioned also is that there's an accompanying paper of some depth to this webinar, and that paper will be made available to you on the Metric Insights page, and we'll send a link out when we send the presentation. But what we see, and again, borrowing very heavily from the paper that Peter Kapoor and I wrote together on Data Governance 2.0, is a few things that we would encourage you to build into your data governance thinking and maybe even into your data governance structure. So the first of which is that it starts with strategic intent. You should be governing because you want to achieve something in your business. So again, going back to that other slide that was just on, you should be governing because you want these people to read these reports with these frequency because they need to make that decision. And that requires someone senior to understand, okay, what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to reduce attrition. You're trying to increase market share. All of the metrics that are relatively common need to come into your business intelligence strategy group. And that maybe is a fancy term. It doesn't need to be that heavy. And then the second one is where experts in BI and business intelligence and business, engage in a governance and sort of say, okay, these are the things we need to work on. And this is the thing that we need to manage when we're working on that. Frequency of reports, access of people to report, speed and latency of data, et cetera. And then in the third, and this for me is my favorite group when we set this up and really the most fun group, these are experts, basically experts that are more or less crowdsourced, to be frank. They're the people who are enthusiastic about acting as the gearbox between, oh, this is the business strategy, this is the sort of technical and data capability we have, and this is what the users need. Let's make sure we're working on the right stuff. And these people might play a role in certification, for example. They might be play a role in accelerating best practices, but it's a very energetic group, very mixed. As you showed, Marius, in your little tile slide, some of these people will frequently appear in these tiles, data stewards, business owners, but it's a mixed group who's always constantly working to make sure that the folks in the bottom are getting their needs met and the folks in the top understand what it takes to meet those needs. So this business user group might also be saying, we need more licenses, or they might be saying, we need different hardware, or they might be saying, we need access to loyalty data that we can't get right now. But regardless, they are really active working to keep the whole machine. I think it's really important, and I think that some tools like yours make this more possible to harness the wisdom of the crowd. You got smart people in your organization that don't have the word data anywhere in their title, but they're making good BI decisions, BI business intelligence led decisions. And you should have a way to surface who they are. Sometimes that's voting. Sometimes it's, that you showed and the inference of that. Regardless, there's a lot more smart people out there who want to be involved in BI decision-making, even if they don't want to be in quote unquote governance. And then finally, I think if you're really getting started, you could try a crack at using sort of a use case approach to this. What are some of the BI tools that you have today that you believe are probably well-utilized, well understood? It could be a simple reporting, be a visualization tool. What are the ones you're a little bit nervous about? And what would you do to govern those two? How often would you bring them into the BI user and producer group for review? how would you evaluate whether or not they're connected to the strategy? These are all things that you can do more easily when you have sort of a tangible case to work on. And I call those essential actions as opposed to use cases, because to me, use cases are sometimes one and done. And essential actions are the things that these BI users are doing. As you say, sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's quarterly, sometimes it's every year for the annual board report. But find those actions that you can really hook into on a practical level and the people who need that data and the BI behind it, and help govern those practices and then extrapolate that to something slightly larger. Again, keeping it relatively lightweight. So for me, this is all about understanding that the top down matters, and so does the bottom up. And to go back once again to your most recent slide, Marius, I think it would be super fascinating to me if I knew quite clearly and I had documented what our strategic intent was and how BI will help that, and I didn't see anyone looking at reports that are designed to fix that, I have a problem. I either have a strategy that I can't really implement on a tactical level, or I have a group who is designed to deliver the daily and the weekly and the monthly execution of that strategy who doesn't understand it. But what a beautiful opportunity when you have the right tool and the right governance approach that you can expose that. You can say, what are we doing wrong? Like, what are we missing? We obviously aren't meeting the user need, or we're not understanding the strategy well enough. That's always a possibility too. But that's what good governance does. It turns strategy into action by making sure the right people are working on the right things at the right time in the right way. And I think that's what we try to design with this relatively lightweight structure.
And I think, Drew, it's really interesting in your diagram there. You've got that continuous cycle between sort of the central COE, the kind of the BI governance office, and the BI users and producers groups, or the which tends to be more of the satellite groups within large organizations. And I think that's exactly right. Going back to that point of the question that was made, people that are reluctant, that you're not seeing engaging with BI. That's almost always a problem of the juice not being worth the squeeze for them, right? That they're just not getting the value out of the effort that they've put in the past in looking at BI. So, and that is fundamentally, it's a governance failure. It's not, don't blame it on them. It's on the analyst. It's on the fact that we just have not connected the dots for them in a way that where they can really, in a short period of time, get to the analysis that they want, understand that analysis, and make use of it, right? Such that they want to come back and do it again and again and again. So looking at, where are things working, where are they not, applying those practices in a distributed way in partnership where the center of excellence is partnering with the satellite teams that are working close with the users. I think that's really the only way to be successful in this governance exercise.
Yeah, sorry for the mute. I just had something in my throat. So we actually only have about 60 seconds left. I don't think I could read Cody's question in 60 seconds, but I think if I infer Cody's question, it was really, could you do this a different way? Could you put these people in who have BI and data knowledge into a group? Yes, into a business group. And yes, you could. That might be called a hub and spoke model in some people's case. You don't really have to take these boxes literally. These boxes could be little mini boxes inside business units. The key is that there is an active communication up and down from the BI community who are working on essential actions into this group. Whether they sit in many places doesn't matter, and whether this group has a really quick and intimate connection to the BI governance office. And that's a little bit what I was trying to get across with these arrows. So I think the thing is, where those people sit matters less than the fact that you inspire continuous communication among them, that you leverage facts and data around what's happening in your BI world using those tools that you showed. And then you use that to make the decisions around what is happening, as well as feedback. And then there was a quick question about who's in the BI community. Everybody's in the BI community. Business intelligence is actually how analytics, by and large, in most companies hits the many people. And even if it isn't, it's actually created by the few. So everyone is in the BI community. So it's not meant that you engage everyone in that group. The point there is the BI community works on essential actions, and leveraging understanding of those essential actions can help you get started on this type of lightweight framework. So that was what we were trying to get across with point 4, Fausto. But I can also say, again, it's all outlined in the paper, and the paper, as I say, will be available end of day. And so when you get this presentation, because you've registered for the webinar, you will get this presentation. You will get this link, which will take you to Metric Insights website. and you will find this paper, which is explaining some of these concepts in more depth. And then you'll have the slides with visualizations that Marius was nice enough to provide us behind this one as well. And so, Marius, I want to make sure you have a chance to say some closing thoughts for us, and then we'll let people continue on with their day, and hopefully they will make a choice.
Yeah, well, thank you, Drew, for including me in this. And I think, just again, there's one thing I'll sum up is it's not don't try to boil the ocean, do it incrementally, looking at the framework as inspiration, but it has to be adapted to your particular organization and the scale at which you're operating. But think about, as you go apply this area, where can you get the biggest bang for the buck? What are the areas where you can apply BI governance and really have fundamental transformative impact within the organization? Because I guarantee if you look hard enough, there's a lot of places where you can do that.
Yeah, exactly. So same as Mars, get started, go after it. It's not impossible. It's within your capability. Use the tools that you have, investigate the use of other tools, which will make you stronger. But by all means, get started. With that said, thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your questions.